On August 17, 1958, a fish and game warden in Death Valley, California, found a car abandoned in the desert 42 miles from the nearest town. The keys were still in the ignition and there was no sign of foul play. The car was registered to Lieutenant Paul Whipke of Fort Ord, California, almost 500 miles away. The Army reported that Whipke had been missing for 5 weeks and in fact, was wanted as a deserter. But there was a problem. By all accounts, Paul Whipke was the perfect soldier. No one who knows him believes he could have been a deserter. Carl Whipke is Paul's brother. Paul Whipke was an ROTC honor graduate. After basic training, he won a spot in the Army Aviation School. In 1957, at Camp Desert Rock in Nevada, Paul flew an observation plane during testing of the atomic bomb. He was exposed to radioactive fallout, and it's soon after that when unusual blotches appeared on his skin. Several months later, stationed at Fort Ord, California, Paul had to have all of his teeth removed. On July 10, 1958, late one afternoon, Paul left Fort Ord. He told friends that he was headed for the town of Monterey, less than a mile away. But Paul never returned. The next morning, Paul was reported AWOL and 30 days later, he was declared a deserter. The following week, his car was discovered in Death Valley. The Army says that on the day Paul left, he apparently ended up at White's Motel in Mojave, California, some 350 miles from the base. Paul had signed the motel's guest registration. Army investigators say they found a gasoline receipt in Paul's car. It showed that he had bought gas in Mojave, before his car ended up in Death Valley, 145 miles away. On the very morning Paul turned up missing, 2 soldiers stripped his room at Fort Ord. Everything was removed, including Paul's personal belongings. According to his brother Carl, this was an odd and perhaps illegal procedure. Regulations state that the next of kin or legal representative must be notified before packing belongings. And they didn't notify us at that time. I was very suspicious of this action as soon as I discovered it had taken place. For weeks after Paul was reported, a witness driving through Death Valley saw his car. He said it was being driven by a man in military uniform. However, when Paul left Fort Ord, he was wearing civilian clothes. When the car was found, a pile of cigarette butts was on the ground next to it. Paul didn't smoke. Also troubling to Paul's family was the fact that the Army waited 9 months before looking for his body. And it was only by accident that Carl Whipke heard anything about the car at all. The only way that I learned about the car was due to an unofficial call I placed to an enlisted man at Fort Ord. Within half an hour, he called back very excited and he said this is classified information and requested that I not tell anyone where I had heard it. The investigation into Paul's disappearance also troubled his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Lewis. I found it almost unbelievable that he would be classified as a deserter. I was curious what the basis for it was. And I was quickly and promptly told, "Charlie, forget this. The case has been closed and I would recommend that you don't carry it any further." In essence, I was told to shut up and drop it and blow away. Charles Lewis and Paul Whipke were both stationed in Nevada during 1957. Lewis recalls the day he saw 2 men in plain clothes talking to Paul. I noticed that they had gone directly to the airfield instead of reporting to operations, which was required for a purpose of security. So I asked them for their identification. They showed me their military identification cards and the picture did verify who the 2 were. Over the next few weeks, Lewis often saw Paul talking to the same 2 men. When LT Whipke would come in after they had departed, you could feel a rigidity in his personality traits and his mannerisms. In hindsight, Lewis now believes that Paul may have met with the 2 men for one simple reason. During that era, there was a tremendous amount of nationwide recruiting conducted by the CIA. And with Lieutenant Whipke's qualifications, he would have been an exceptional candidate for such an assignment. Paul's brother, Carl, thinks there may be some truth to this as well. January of the year he disappeared, he told me during a telephone conversation that he was going to be going on an assignment, that he was going to make a name for himself. Before he could tell me what it was, he was interrupted by some officers moving in the proximity of his desk and he could no longer talk to me about the subject. I theorize that Paul was recruited into an Army, CIA joint program that was going on at that time. When Paul left Fort Ord, he drove to the town of Mojave, California and checked into White's Motel. There's a possibility that he was met there by Army intelligence agents or the CIA and transported to Southeast Asia, possibly from Edwards Air Force Base, which is nearby. Carl now believes that his brother was assigned to a secret mission and left his car with the Army. He thinks they kept it 4 weeks before driving it into the desert. But not knowing the answer leaves him always wondering. I think the Army took his car out to the desert to get rid of it. Out of sight, out of mind. If they would just say, yes, he died on a secret assignment, we could live with that. We're all loyal American citizens in our family and we would buy that. And until the Army tells us what happened, there will be no peace in our family. In 1982, the Army reviewed Paul Whipke's case and found no basis to support his status as a deserter. 2 months later his final status was officially changed from deserter to died in the line of duty. On night of January 16, 1984, a gruesome discovery was made at a house on East Center Drive, Aurora, Colorado. The bludgeoned bodies of husband and wife, Bruce and Deborah Bennett, were discovered and it soon became evident that they had both been attacked with a knife and beaten to death. Later autopsies would reveal that the Bennetts had died due to blunt force trauma and that their attacker had likely used a hammer. Investigators noted there was evidence of a struggle at the house. 28-year-old Bruce Bennett had jumped into action when the attacker entered the family home and a struggle broke out between the two as Bennett attempted to protect his family. Evidence of wounds caused by a blade revealed that Bruce attempted to defend himself as the intruder swiped and slashed at him with a knife. His attacker slit his throat before eventually delivering a final fatal blow with a hammer. The killer then ascended the staircase and entered the couple's bedroom where attacked Bruce's wife, 26-year-old Deborah, who he raped before bludgeoning to death. He then found the couple's oldest daughter, 7-year-old Melissa, who tragically suffered the same terrible fate as her mother. The family had been celebrating Melissa's birthday that night. The couple's youngest daughter, 3-year-old Vanessa, was also attacked by the hammer-wielding assailant. The hammer stuck her in the jaw, shattering the bone which splintered in an explosion of small fragments that punctured her windpipe. He continued to attack the child, causing severe injuries, but the 3-year-old held on to life and was alive the next morning when she was discovered by her grandmother. Medical professionals weren't sure if the hammer attack would leave Vanessa with permanent brain damage or not, but the girl's family held on to the hope that she would make a full recovery. The child's skull was caved in on the right side of her forehead and a metal plate was inserted to reshape the skull. She suffered severe injuries to her head, jaw, and neck. She was also left with a shattered pelvis and fell into a coma. With time, multiple surgeries, and the support her extended family, Vanessa began to recover from her physical injuries, but living a normal life after losing both her parents to a murderer who had yet to be captured and convicted made childhood difficult. The other kids at school would tease her, telling her the hammerman was going to come and finish her off. They saw her parents' killer as a boogeyman who would attack them and kill them if they went anywhere near little Vanessa's home for parties or play dates. As she got older, unresolved anger issues caused Vanessa to clash with her grandmother who had become her primary caretaker. After the death of her parents, although she had no memory of the attack, what happened that night in 1984 would negatively impact the rest of her life. Her head was constantly swimming with thoughts of her parents. Why did they have to get murdered? Why was she the lone survivor? Not only was she left with physical injuries and scars as a reminder of the attack, she was also left with ADHD, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. As an adult, she developed a drug habit and became an addict. She left her hometown and moved to Arizona, at one point spending half a year homeless, living under a bridge. Police later linked the murder of the Bennett family with another rape and murder that happened just less than a week before. The previous week, on the 10th of January, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Smith had also been murdered in her own home in a townhouse in Green Mountain, Lakewood, which is just a 25-minute drive from the Bennett's home in Aurora. The police found her posed with her arms crossed over her chest, as if she was in a coffin. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and the murder weapon: a hammer. On the 4th of January, James and Kimberly Haubenschild were also attacked with a hammer at their home in Aurora, but both survived. Another resident, Donna Dixon, was also struck with a hammer. She too survived the attack, although she was first in a coma for some time. In fact, there was a string of unsolved crimes in the area that took place just days apart from each other. Sadly, technology was not as advanced in the mid-80s as it is today, and the case went cold, remaining that way for over 30 years. Investigators did not forget about the hammer murders, however, nor did the town of Aurora. For years the authorities and true crime sleuths never gave up trying to identify the sick individual responsible for the murders and assaults that happened that year. Investigators had collected and stored the killer's DNA from the crime scene back in 1984. And since they did not know the hammer killer's identity, at the time issued a warrant for the arrest of John Doe on 3 counts of murder, attempted murder, felony murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, and 2 counts of child sexual assault in the hope that technology in the future could aid in identifying the assailant. Vanessa, now 38 years old, received a call from the Aurora Sheriff's Department informing her that her parents' killer had been identified as 57-year-old Alexander Christopher Ewing. Alexander Christopher Ewing is already behind bars, serving 40 years for 2 counts of attempted murder in the state of Nevada. Ewing's DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's database, this year, 2018 as I write this, and the following morning his profile was matched to the DNA found at the crime scenes of both the Bennett family and Patricia Smith. Alexander Ewing's list of seemingly endless violent crimes are described throughout the many articles published about him since he has been identified as the man behind the murder of the Bennett family. This article in the Denver Post describes how after he murdered the Bennetts he went on to enter the house of a man in Kingman, Arizona, and attempted to bludgeon the men to death with a 20-pound rock. He was arrested for the crime but went on to escape from prison transport during a gas station break. The same night he escaped, he broke into yet another couple's house and attacked the male of the home. He went on to continually beat the man's wife as she attempted to shield her husband from the blows of an axe handle while simultaneously on the phone to 911. Ewing would not stop hitting her the entire time, and eventually the woman realized that she would have to play dead in order to get him to stop. Ewing has been locked up since. Vanessa Bennett was shocked to receive the phone call identifying the men who murdered her entire family and attempted to murder her in 1984 and admits it hasn't quite sunk in. She said in an interview that she has big plans for the future, and reminds us that it's never too late to achieve big things. Thank you again for joining us for another video. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe and comment down below and let us know what you would like to hear in the near future. See you all again soon.